Hey guys and girls, so today we are doing part 2 of our lecture notes on Hitler's Lightning War. This is chapter 16, section 1 of your text. Please start notes for this section on a different piece of binder paper or Google Doc and go ahead and submit it when you're done. So we're just going to pick up where we left off. In yesterday's lecture, we talked about British soldiers being stranded at Dunkirk and that huge amateur rescue mission that took place to get them out of there. So Hitler is on his way to France. He is invading France, and France is not going to last very long. The French resistance is going to crumble pretty soon after Dunkirk. Hitler is actually going to be joined by Benito Mussolini of Italy, who's going to invade or attack France from the south. The French see defeat coming pretty quickly, and they decide to surrender. They surrender in June of 1940. The Germans take control of the northern part of the country, and they leave the southern part to a puppet government. A puppet government is a government that they've kind of like okayed to be there, that is still French, but is not going to resist or cause them any troubles. There is a French general by the name of Charles de Gaulle who flees to London, and there he is able to set up a government in exile. And this government is committed to taking France back, so they're going to spend all of their time and effort and resources to try to get France back. So here we have some French soldiers who are surrendering. This is a pretty infamous image of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower. So with France out of the way, Hitler is going to now try to invade Great Britain. At first, the Germans are going to target just British airfields and aircraft factories, but later in 1940, they're going to begin to focus on bombing cities, especially London. And their rationale here is to break British morale. So as of September of 1940, you see bombs exploding daily in city streets. They kill civilians, they set buildings ablaze. Despite all of this destruction, though, and loss of life, the British fight on. So the Royal Air Force, they hit back pretty hard. They fight back pretty fiercely, and they have two secret weapons at their disposal. One is an electronic tracking system known as radar. It was developed in the 1930s. Radar could tell the number, the speed, and the direction of incoming warplanes. The second secret weapon was a German code-making machine named Enigma. And a complete machine was actually smuggled to Great Britain in 1938. And the Enigma allowed them access into secret German messages. So with that information, the RAF fighters, the Royal Air Force flyers, could quickly get to their airplanes and inflict deadly harm on the German enemy. So the Battle of Britain, as it became known, continued until May of around 1941. And the Germans were actually stunned by British resistance. Hitler ends up having to call off his attacks, and instead he shifts his attention elsewhere. But the key lesson or takeaway from the Battle of Britain was that it demonstrated that Hitler could be stopped. This is actually a German plane, the Luftwaffe. This is the city of London. It's bombed out. British pilots. This is a course spotter. He's kind of scanning the skies for the Luftwaffe. All right, so Hitler has to shift his attention to the Mediterranean and the Eastern Front. But before, um, he he actually shifts his attention to North Africa. So this is kind of where Mussolini is leading him, right? Mussolini has his eyes set on North Africa, and his goal is to seize the British-controlled Egypt. Egypt has the Suez Canal, which is key to reaching oil fields in the Middle East. So Italian troops invade Egypt. Unfortunately for the the British decided to strike back, and by the beginning part of 1941, early 1941, the British had swept about 500 miles across North Africa, and they had taken over 130,000 Italian soldiers, prisoners. So Hitler has to step in to help his buddy Mussolini. He sends the German general Erwin Rommel, who became known as the Desert Fox. He sends him to Libya. And there's kind of a lot of back and forth here between the British and the German in North Africa. There's a lot of back and forth, but in the end, the General Erwin Rommel comes out victorious and beats the Allies in Northern Africa. So he's able to seize Tobruk. This is a U.S. transport command plane. It's loaded with war supplies. It's flying over the pyramids at Giza near Cairo, 1943. So Hitler had also been planning for all this time his attack on the USSR. And his plan was going to be to attack the Soviet Union or Russia from the Balkans. So the Balkan countries of southeastern Europe were key to Hitler's invasion plans. Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary cooperate, and they join Hitler. They join the Axis powers early in 1941. But Yugoslavia and Greece, actually, they had pro-British governments and they resisted. However, Hitler was able to invade in 1941. Both Yugoslavia and Greece fell to Hitler. Yugoslavia fell in only 11 days, and Greece surrendered after 17 days. So Hitler's plan to invade the Soviet Union was known as Operation Barbarossa. And the Soviet Union was not prepared for this attack. They had 5 million men in the Red Army. It was the largest in the world, but it was neither well-equipped nor was it well-trained. So the Russians have to retreat, and as they start retreating, they're burning and destroying everything in the enemy's path. The Russians use the same strategy against Napoleon. Remember, scorched earth policy, right? Burn everything down as they leave nothing for the enemy. But unfortunately, later that year, the Germans surround the city of Leningrad and they isolate it from the rest of the world. Hitler actually thought that he could starve the 2.5 million inhabitants that lived there. So German bombs destroyed warehouses where food was stored. Desperately hungry people began eating cattle, horse feed. They ate cats, dogs, crows, rats. There's even accounts of people eating their own dead children. Overall, more than 1 million people died in Leningrad. Yet, the city refused to fall. It somehow was able to stay standing, and that probably was due to their sheer numbers. But seeing that Leningrad was not going to surrender, Hitler looked to Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet general, Georgy Zhukov, he counterattacked. He had about 100 fresh Siberian divisions. And as you know, those Russian winters, as those temperatures began to fall, Germans in their summer uniforms had to retreat. But even still, Hitler kind of refused to ignore Napoleon's defeat 130 years later, and pushed his troops forward. This was unsuccessful, though. In the end, Germany lost. They lost about 500,000 soldiers. So here we have a map, a visual of Operation Barbarossa. You can see here going into Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. So these are citizens of Leningrad. They're fetching some water to make leather soup. So they actually boiled leather to make soup to be able to eat it. These are two women that are collecting the remains of a dead horse for food. All right, so where is the United States in all of this? Remember, the United States is trying to cling to their policy of isolationism. Congress passes the Neutrality Acts, which make it illegal to sell arms or lend any money to nations at war. But Roosevelt realizes that if his allies come crumbling down, that the United States is going to get dragged into a war anyways. So he convinces Congress to approve the Lend-Lease Act, which allowed President Roosevelt to lend or lease arms to and other supplies to any country that's vital to the U.S. So they're not technically selling them, they're lending them arms. It's kind of a sidestep to the Neutrality Acts. Roosevelt and Churchill also meet secretly, and they issue a joint declaration called the Atlantic Charter. And the Atlantic Charter did a couple different things, but it upheld free trade and the right to choose your own government. It also allowed the United States to kind of charter or help escort those supplies from the U.S. to Great Britain. Not surprisingly, German U-boats start firing on U.S. destroyers in the Atlantic, and Roosevelt orders Navy commanders to respond. So before you know it, the United States is involved in an undeclared naval war with Germany. However, this isn't actually the conflict that drew the United States into the war officially anyways. It was actually Japan, or conflict with Japan, that draws the United States into the war officially. And we'll talk more about that in our next section. So that's it for this section. Please finish up your notes, get those turned in, and as always, let me know if you have any questions. Bye.